Hello, and welcome to the Thinking Elixir podcast, where we cover the news of the community and learn from each other. My name is Mark Erickson.
And I'm David Bernheisel.
Let's jump into the news. First up, there is some big news for the Elixir community. The Oban Web project by Parker Selbert goes open source. So Parker Selbert he was on a podcast and he went public with his plan to make the Oban dashboard open source. He explained the change saying, for the growth of Oban and the growth of Elixir, the dashboard is actually very important. And so we're working towards actually open sourcing Oban Web so that it's free and open and everyone can use it. I completely agree with the importance of having a strong or de facto job processing system. And that is actually important to the success of Elixir and Phoenix applications, just in general, because when people start to build something, they're often reaching for background jobs and asynchronous tasks like that. And that's maybe if they're coming from Rails or something else, like that's how you do all async stuff, is in a background job.
Yeah, and I think that's such big news that deserves a sound effect. Yeah. This is the whole Elixir community, just applauding the hard work and the effort. And I don't want to forget Shannon Selbert in there too, doing a good bit of work of Oban Web as well. But yeah, if you're a new developer coming to Elixir and you need some durable job and you got Oban, you would probably be surprised to learn that there was no way to actually visualize the jobs that were going on. So not without paying for Oban Web at the time. So anyway, I think that's going to be a huge turn and a huge turn for the whole Elixir community, I think, to just have that tool available and go right to it. That'll probably, if I had to guess, also spurn a lot of development for. I'm totally speculating at this point, but it's got to turn into some plugin system, some extension system for Oban, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much you can do with Oban that's not just about durable jobs, but all the other things there. I'm thinking data migrations. I'm thinking short run little dev tasks, just anything that needs to be in the background or async, something along those lines. I can already see it happening.
Yeah. What's funny is I remember years ago working in Rails and we added, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was one of the
Sidekick.
Yeah, it may have been Sidekick, and there was another delayed job even before that one. Right. And it came with its own version of a dashboard. It was not super grand. It was not anything super impressive, but it gave you visibility into what was going on. And that was really important to us as we were adding this to our project, just trying to visualize, is this working correctly? How do I know this is working correctly? Yeah. So I totally agree that it is an important piece. And the whole idea of background jobs being an important thing is just brought to mind recently when I heard that the Rails community been putting a lot of energy behind a new database-backed job queue called Solid Queue. And got a link to that in the GitHub. So it's fairly new, like a 9-month-old project. But yeah, starting to pick up steam. So just this is an important thing. I gotta say, I created a startup, right? It's a marriage relationship focused service called Passion Place. It's at passion.place. And I have actually been avoiding adding a job queue because I couldn't afford Oban, right? While I'm not making any money, I can't justify the cost. I knew I could use Oban and meaning the open source version, but I also knew about Oban Web and what it could do and that I would not have access to it. And I also couldn't justify spending my own development time on building a visualization dashboard just to have that. So what did I do? I just avoided it. So far, it's been fine. I hadn't needed it. I was able to work around any issues for needing background jobs. But there are features that I'd like to add in the future where, that's an important thing. I will need to have something. But then making Oban Web open source makes it immediately attractive to me. And I believe many other startups or would-be startups would feel the same way. And I'm not opposed to paying for it. When Passion Place is making enough money, I'm happy to pay for the extra features that would really help scale. But now with this change, I feel much more confident about adding it to the project now, while it's still just getting off the ground. Oban Web and Oban Pro are not cheap. But if you have a service that actually is valuable and is making money, then you have the money to pay for it. And it's yes, this is a fair trade. I'm really able to leverage this and it's doing a lot for me.
Yeah.
But like startups, unless you're funded or something, it's like, I can't afford that. I'm bootstrapped. I'm, low key here. Anyway, I think it's an awesome move. I'm super excited about it. I think it'll be a big help to the community as a whole. I still hope that it can be sustainable for Parker, right? He's trying to make this into a business for himself as well. And I hope that making this change doesn't take away a revenue stream, but in fact ends up growing the pie so that he's getting more money overall still.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. And you said it wasn't that Oban Pro and Oban Web. They weren't cheap. I mean, it's all relative.
Yes,
exactly. It's very cheap to enterprises. It's very cheap.
Oh yes.
Like the amount of effort and enablement that gives them. Oh my gosh, it's like peanuts to them, right? So like that's a good price. Definitely a good price for them. When you're talking about solo devs, when you're not making money or you're not funded, like you said, I can see that it's not cheap relative to the other things that you're paying for. For example, hosting is probably $8 a month, right?
Yep.
Something along those lines. $8 a month compared to Oban Web and Pro. Probably not it's not in the same ballpark.
Yes.
Well, regardless, I think that's a great move, Parker, and I hope that it's still very successful. That it's remains sustainable, and that I think that'll actually trigger a lot of like additional development on Oban, and just really encourage the rest of the community to just adopt it as the tool.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, moving forward, there is a new community resource for Phoenix LiveView components. LiveView is nearing 1.0.
Yeah, if you look at the GitHub project, it's on RC number. I don't have to go check.
We're almost there. And I feel like that 1.0 is really the permission that these component libraries are going to give themselves to release, right? So I suspect we'll see a couple of these crop up shortly. But there's one that's cropping up now. It's an open source project with more than about 80 components for Phoenix LiveView. There's a generator for everything. There's no dependencies. They're aiming to go to about 200 components. That's a lot of components. And by components, we're talking about the small components like a button, and the larger components like a timeline, as if you're rendering, the history of a thing, and you got little avatars and a paragraph, next to it, and then you got the next one that kind of shows the next bit of time. Yeah, your smaller and your larger kind of components. It is open source, like I mentioned, so we have a link to the GitHub project. It's called Mishka Chalokum. I don't know if I got this right. What a name, by the way. But we'll at least it's Googleable, as long as you can spell it.
It's unique, yes.
Yeah. So the docs have code documentation, interactive examples of the components. It doesn't look to be using Phoenix Playgrounds, by the way. They definitely did their own thing when it came to the documentation site, which is not a bad thing. This is actually good because they can do whatever they want with it, and it looks pretty great. And like I said, it's a playground that you can go check out all the components. It's just not the Phoenix Playgrounds library. Let me put it that way.
Yep.
All right. And Zach Daniel noted that this was an excellent use of Igniter for installing the components into your project. So I haven't mentioned that yet, but yes, it is using Igniter. Igniter is that composable mix task for basically generating that kind of code into your project from the library. So if you just wanted to add a component, you run a mix task and it would kind of do that for you. Source aware, which is the cool part of Igniter. Speaking of Igniter, quick aside, Dave Lucia will be live streaming today as of the time of this recording. When this releases, it'll have been a week ago, but he'll be live coding an Igniter installer for OpenTelemetry. So hopefully he'll post a link, that it won't just be live, that it'll also be, archived on his page. But and if he does, we'll have our show notes updated to point to that. But Igniter does seem to be gaining some good momentum here. Being used here in this Phoenix LiveView component library is a very good use case for Igniter.
Yeah, that was one of those things that makes a lot of sense, right? I just want to add this component right now, just pull that one in, and then being able to intelligently put it into your application, not just dump it someplace into it. Here's in the console, copy this and paste it all these different pieces, and yeah, much better. So speaking of Mishka, I wouldn't say it's the most attractive set of components I've seen, but maybe that's just a styling tweak to have it fit your application. And being open source, I don't know how open they are to having a different design direction. Like if you're talking about Tailwind UI, they are a purchased thing, so you can't just copy Tailwind UI and plop that in there necessarily, without having copyright issues, perhaps. I don't know. So it's interesting. But we did want to share another resource for Phoenix LiveView components. It's called Fluxon UI. It is another one. It actually looks quite nice. It's pretty, but it does look to be a paid resource. The price isn't even listed yet. So if you just check out the documentation on installing the Hex package, it requires a license key and it pulls from their server. So that's not necessarily something I'm typically a fan of. Like for my component libraries, I guess I got burned by that doing C# on Windows, spending thousands of dollars on these different component libraries that are huge, expansive things. And yeah, they were really advanced, but you feel it after a while. And I guess I got a little burned out. What I would love to see is a high quality set of UI components. Then you have a great starting place for building any kind of, SaaS app or any app you want. I don't know. I think that's an exciting time for the Elixir community to have this type of momentum. With this Mishka tool, they laid out their roadmap and said after they get to their 200 components, that's kind of what they're aiming for, then they want to start building out whole page templates. And that's where you start getting into now I just want to have a marketing page and a landing page. And maybe I can just quickly build out my startup idea and my components are there. And if they're looking great and nice, then I can just get right into it. Oh, I got my background jobs and I got my visual dashboard right there. I can see it all. It's like, I'm ready to go. Yeah. I think that's exciting.
I wonder if they'll do the Tailwind model there. Tailwind CSS is free, like Mishka would be free, but then once you get to the the whole page templates, then that would be like a paid thing.
I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, moving on. We got there was an interesting developer survey that was put out. It's by the Software House. I haven't heard of them before. Just came across it myself. It's definitely front end oriented in this case, kind of like Stack Overflow's developer survey, but this one is all about front-end technology. And so they published some results to it. We've got a link to the data and to their interpretations. And I bring it up because Phoenix actually shows up in their report, which I was surprised by.
What?
Yeah, like LiveView is a front-end framework, I guess. I mean, obviously it is, right? It has to work with front ends. The audience for this survey is definitely front-end developers, though, so we got to keep that in mind. Despite that, there were some interesting data points from them. Here's a couple that I pulled out. And this is as far as I'm understanding it. Very few front-end developers on this survey had ever used Phoenix. But when they did, only 0.5% of them disliked it, which I thought was really interesting. If I'm understanding this correctly, on 0.5% disliking Phoenix, I'm like, wow, that's a very small, like, you can't say, positive things out there in the world and have only 0.5% of people dislike that, like that's a pretty small percentage of people. And again, if I'm interpreting this correctly, more front-end developers would prefer to learn Phoenix than Ember, Angular, Alpine.js, and even React. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it. Clearly, I must be misinterpreting this. Okay, but so before we hang on to that last one too long, though, like React clearly has market saturation. It's the most widely used and liked one for what it's worth, right? Like it is definitely the winner. It's number one on their frameworks and all this kind of stuff, right? I think all this means is that even React developers are interested in learning Phoenix. And so here's to sum up the points, I think. And this is a quote, direct quote from their survey. It says, there seems to be a lack of familiarity or relevance with the usage of Phoenix and Ember, signaling potential areas of growth or reconsideration from developers in the future. And I think that's right on, right? Like Phoenix is definitely a back-end, centric framework. It's widely known for back-end developers, and it's new ground for Phoenix LiveView to really reach into the front-end market, right? Heck, half the big Twitter storms that happen out there are because of front-end developers or front-end developer evangelists just not quite understanding, like what Phoenix LiveView brings to the table. And so I think there is definitely a huge I'm going to call it hockey stick growth kind of opportunity, for Phoenix and Phoenix LiveView in particular, with the rest of the developer community at large, the front end developer community at large. I don't know. What'd you take from it, Mark?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you talk about front end frameworks, I have to remember and just remind myself that these are the SPAs, right? These are the front end frameworks where it's any number of different types of backends. It could be a C# backend or a Django or Rails or Python. If someone were to say, oh yeah, I'm really interested in Phoenix LiveView, well, that means the whole stack is Phoenix, right?
Yeah.
And so it just means okay, maybe the total addressable market isn't quite the same. But yeah, React comes out the winner in this at almost 70%, 69.9. So it's 70% of the people use and like React. And then of the want to learn React in the future, it's at 7%. So that's like market saturation, right? Like there's just not any more growth possible.
Mm-hmm. And the percentages for Phoenix were 1.8% used and liked it. So I'm guessing this is the big pool of developers that took the survey.
Yeah.
So 1.8% liked it, 0.5% didn't like it. And then of
all the people surveyed,
9.8% want to learn it in the future. So 1 out of 10 know something about Phoenix, not enough to really have a real opinion, but they want to know more about it.
Mm-hmm.
Then the vast majority were like, I don't care what this is. I don't even know. I am not interested. I am happy in my own little world.
Yep.
Or I just have no opinion about it, which for what it's worth, like most of these frameworks are, that's the majority of their percentages too.
Yeah. And the no opinion is I'm not against it. I'm not for it. I just,
I don't know enough,
It just exists over there.
Yeah. So yeah, 9.8%. Just to get an idea of the spread here though, like 9.8% is, among the lower side of the pool here of wanting to learn more about Phoenix for front end developers. So I'm not going to make that look better than it is. But the highest point is Svelte. 43% of front end developers want to learn Svelte. So like that's nearly half, right? 4 out of 10. Let's just call it that.
That tells you there's a lot of React people saying, I should be checking out Svelte. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but hey, if 4 out of 10 want to learn Svelte and then 1 out of 10 wants to learn Phoenix, like that's not a small number of front end developers.
Yeah.
And who knows how that would grow in the future. This year it's 1 out of 10. Maybe next year it'd be like 2 out of 10. I don't know. I'm being helpful at this point, but just thought it was interesting. Go dive into data for yourself. Understand. Like I said earlier, I'm sure I've misunderstood some of the data here, but I thought these were very interesting data points. And the fact that we showed up at all on the survey was just good news.
Yeah, honestly, because there are other front end frameworks like Laravel Livewire, right? That did not show up.
Yeah.
And the Rails Hotwire did not show up.
Turbo or whatever it was over there.
Yeah. So just the fact that we showed up, that's impressive because it's like front end focused people.
For what it's worth, though, Alpine.js is kind of coupled with Livewire. So maybe that means Livewire.
Yeah, true. All right. And next up, the Elixir Stream Week is completed. And we have a link to the YouTube playlist. So it was live and it was the whole week of Elixir streams or Stream Week. And it was hosted by Software Mansion. And it appears to have been a success overall. So I think that's really cool. And in terms of the video stream quality, after the first day, so it was Jose, he went on the first day and he had some technical issues on his end that were just unique to his setup. And there may have been some technical issues. It was unclear if it was his setup or if it was the stream itself, the Elixir Web RTC library that was, the infrastructure underneath it all. But then all the other presentations looked like it was super solid, right? Like there was no issue there. So that right there is a great indication. If you're needing to do Web RTC or anything like that, it's like, hey, this is solid. This has demonstrated itself. So we do have a link to the set of presentations. It's over in a single playlist. Just to recap, Jose Valim talked about what's new in Elixir 1.18. Mateus Front talked about Boombox Explained. Chris McCord did a live coding real-time Twitch clone. Jonathan Quosco did Q&A about Livebook, Elixir, NX, and Bumblebee. And Philippe Cabajo did real-time systems using Elixir Supabase stories. Lots of good, interesting content. And it's all available so you can catch it at your own time and your own leisure, be able to pause, fast forward, have sped up playback, whatever you want to do. It's all there. It's on YouTube.
All right, next up, there's a new Elixir and Kafka client called Klife. Klife as in knife, but Klife with an L. Klife. I don't know.
Klife.
Klife. Yeah, Klife. And so there's an extensive Elixir forum post that really introduces it well, and it's still early on. I don't think it supports all of the things that you would need to really adopt it unless you only needed producers or something along those lines. But it does seem to be fairly impressive in its benchmarks. And so they compare Klife. I'm just going with Klife for now. They compare Klife with Broadway and Kafka X, which are the other two adapters that you could use to consume or produce Kafka events. And Klife is really fast, non-magnitudes faster. Well, it is compared to Kafka X, at least. But Broadway is also quite fast. It's just not fully supporting all that Kafka could support. So there is a new option in town, I guess is the point here. So here's a quote from the post. It says, one of Klife's primary performance improvements is achieved through batching, and by bundling data destined for the same broker into a single TCP request, Klife significantly enhances performance, especially in high throughput scenarios. If that intersects with your use case scenarios, Klife might be a good and interesting Kafka client on the Elixir side to investigate. So got a link to the GitHub project and the Elixir forum post for you to check out.
And next up, just a little follow-up on Beacon CMS. We talked about it in a previous episode. Well, there was a roadmap update that was being shared online by Leandro, who seems to be the main driver behind a lot of the development. So we have a link to where you can see the roadmap, and a lot of what's planned looks really interesting. And they're saying, hey, just so you know, the roadmap is subject to change, but it's driven by the interests of Dockyard and what's coming in from contributions. So I think that's a call to the community, right? If you're interested in the CMS and you're like, hey, I really want this feature in this particular way, it's like, if that doesn't necessarily align with where they're already wanting to go, they're probably open to contributions. Check that out and see if that's something that you want to add. But yeah, I am just really excited to see this and have this as a resource. Like, man, you talk about like the trifecta, right? You got background jobs, you got component libraries, and now you got like a CMS, all like just stuff that into one app. That's incredible.
Boom. Yeah. The productivity of small teams, you know, that's what this really enables. Shipping features per second is high in Elixir and Phoenix. Call back over to our WordPress themed, news episodes, a couple episodes back where we talk more about Beacon and WordPress. So lots of opportunity here. So very interested. All right, next up, hey, just a little correction from previous news episodes. So we talked about Elixir 1.18 and the LSP, and the new LSP project is called Expert, as we found out. So we had assumed, incorrectly as it turns out, that the LSP called Expert and Elixir, would be kind of released together and somehow linked, like as if it's going into Elixir, itself. And that's not quite true. So surely, yes, there are things happening in Elixir core that will enable Expert and help it, but it is not like the same code base. Let me put it that way. Yep. And so Jose did correct us on that. And so thank you for Jose for that. Elixir and LSP, the LSP will remain separate projects. Elixir 1.18 will continue to include, as I'm sure most future versions of Elixir, will continue to include tools to better integrate with the LSPs, but Expert will have its own release schedule, which makes sense, right? The LSP will probably, at least in the near term, be iterating much faster, especially in the early days. So maybe this means that the LSP isn't coming quite as soon as we hoped. So maybe it is. I don't know. It just means that it's not alongside Elixir 1.18 necessarily. Yes. Though it may turn out to happen that way. We'll see. So stay tuned. Very excited about Expert, the unification of all the LSPs. Give me all the best parts of all of them, and we'll have a much better DevX experience with Elixir.
And last up, a topic that's not necessarily Elixir, but it's just interesting in the broader programmer community. Flutter forks into Flock. So Flutter, if you're not familiar with it, it's a framework that Google has developed and spearheaded and to do both mobile development and web development. So it's a whole set of components that are able to be used across devices and use the same set of components or a flavor of the components on the web as well. So currently, Flutter devs are only really at Google. It hasn't been seeing the adoption that they were hoping for, I think. It is something I actually looked at some time ago when I was looking at creating a mobile app and thought it was very interesting. But then also seeing how Apple seemed to, be combating it at times, like saying, no, you can't do it that way, and creating issues with some of the feature support. And so some napkin math indicated that this results in about 1 Flutter dev to every 20,000 Flutter dev users. And so their hope with this fork is to democratize that with an open source community. So they're really trying to grow the number of people who are using Flutter as a framework and a foundation.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how this goes. I generally see a lot of good sentiment towards Flutter, just as one technology to handle a bunch of different platforms. This has been a topic for developers for like 10 years at this point. Like, I just want to write one language and shift it everywhere, right? Yep. It's still a pipe dream. That's never going to happen, but in my opinion, at least.
Yeah.
But Flutter at least does target a lot of different platforms. So, hey, there's that at least, right?
I will say one of the things I did not like about Flutter is, at least it's been, all right, my experience is a couple years stale, right? So I don't know if this is currently how things work. But the language that it was implemented in was Dart. And Dart's an object-oriented language, had a bit of a Java-esque feel to me. And I hated the way they dealt with errors. It was like, oh, this is awful.
It's like Go. The way that Go deals with errors.
Yes.
Since then, I think Swift was also like it was very Apple-centric, and so like Flutter was kind of the only option when you wanted multi-platform targets. But nowadays, I think Swift has actually grown more in that regard. It's decoupled a bit more from Apple. It's still very in the Apple world. Definitely focused on Apple and all, but Swift UI, I think, is opening up to being more like Dart and Flutter kind of a thing. Like, there's kind of two options out there. They're not quite the same, but as a language, Swift definitely looks really nice. I would prefer it over Dart. But when it comes to like platform support, Flutter definitely seems way ahead in that game. They've been at it a while longer, I think. But in typical Apple fashion, I think they've really refined, for their platforms. So Swift and Swift UI, is definitely a really good and solid choice. Probably the only real choice for iOS and Mac kind of development. The issue comes in when you get to those other platforms.
Yeah. That's the big push for like React Native, there's like, hey, JavaScript and React Native, and then I can be cross-platform.
Yeah.
It's got its own set of design problems.
Yeah, like Flutter is inspired by Android and the Google team, which are very Java. So Dart looks very Java, and then you got Swift, which feels, in my opinion, more like the good parts of Objective C, which is not many, but a lot of mixture of like JavaScript syntax. So it's very familiar looking, and so I think that like it's just going to be more familiar, maybe / enjoyable to write in. I could be off, but they're definitely different like mindsets here, different philosophies of like how a language should look and work and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. We'll see. For what it's worth, I think Swift did go open source and did decouple a bit more from Apple. So Swift UI, I think, is a different story, but Swift as a language is definitely already open source. If I recall correctly. So yeah, development's complicated. I don't really love all the stuff moving around all the time. Like,
yes, the tech churn.
Just that. I'm sure all the Java people were like, yeah, just let me write Java for everything. I'm like, well, I don't want to. so I guess it's necessary.
Oh, yes. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us next time on Thinking Elixir.